Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Strategies for Mitigating Cyber Risk in Digital Networks. I am Shilpa Sharma, and I will be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules. For our attendees, the session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 15 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. Also, admissions are currently open. For further details about our courses, please visit our website www.eccu.edu. Our speaker for today's session, Sentil Velaytham. Sentil is an esteemed technical strategist who is celebrated for his adeptness in resolving business challenges and enhancing IT frameworks. Throughout his career, Sentil has effectively supported numerous clients in attaining their objectives. He has cultivated strong collaboration with distinguished technology partners like VMware, Microsoft, Druva, AWS, Commvault, VM, Cohesity, Rubrik, EMC, NetApp, Cisco, Juniper Networks, Extreme Networks, HP, Nutanix, and others. Acknowledged as an advocate for cloud technology, cybersecurity, and data center practice, he staunchly advocates for streamlining technical operations to optimize productivity. Leveraging his profound understanding of these technologies, he addresses complex integration hurdles with refined, efficient, and cost-effective approaches. Driven by a fervent commitment to innovation, Sentil consistently prioritizes team success, establishing himself as a key person of influence in both the technological and business spheres. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Sentil.
Sure. Thank you, Shilpa. Hi, everyone. I'm Sentil Velaytham. I've been in the IT industry for the last 22 years. Over the years, I've had the privilege of working at GlaxoSmithKline, Shell IT, Hewlett Packard, AIG, Logicalis Australia, Commvault, Druva, and VMware with some of the best minds in their field. Today, we'll be walking you through the session about how to mitigate cyber risks in a digital network. So let's before we get into it, let's go through some key takeaways, right? So throughout my career, security has always fascinated me. I watched IT siloed environment to the distributed and containerized nature that it is now. In today's session, some of the key takeaways are we'll look at how managing cyber risks will help you to employ simple but effective strategies in your organization to protect your crown jewels from bad actors. A digital network is a complex interconnected systems of devices that transmit data using various standards, technologies, and protocols, resulting in a combination of heterogeneous infrastructure requiring seamless integration and interoperability across different network clusters. A more straightforward way to put this in perspective would be to look at how your laptop or computer is connected to the network through Wi-Fi or wired connection. That is a network backbone that communicates back to the servers that are based in local or remote data center. You would also have applications that are hosted in a public or a private cloud that are either containerized or delivered as a SaaS service. Additionally, some of these data centers are connected exclusively through a dark fiber network for redundancy to serve data to mobile or edge users that need to view this information on their portable devices. No longer are we servicing data to users in the traditional sense. You probably would have noticed this by now. The proliferation of data across the digital network environment has drastically improved our technological advancement, but also introduced additional complexities and multiple points of vulnerability that needs to be effectively managed and secured to ensure that sensitive information does not fall into the hands of bad actors. Let's look at some of the key environments, right? What are the current threat landscapes to review them, basically? So identity and identity theft and phishing, supply chain and third-party exploitation, zero-day exploitation, ransomware and malware, and generative AI-based threat. Based on the recent report that was published in the 2024 Data Breach Investigations Report by Verizon, it is indicated that a majority of threats that organizations face are due to identity theft and phishing. Extortion through malware and ransomware was second, followed closely by bad actors exploiting the vulnerabilities found in application, especially through zero-day exploitation. There's also a growth in breaches that involve attacks on customers' third-party partners. These could be your service providers, software distributor vendors, building management organization where their offices are located, and etc. The report also found an interesting shift in the number of threats from identity theft. Though there were no surprise in the percentage of external actors for breaches, which was at 65%, the percentage of internal bad actors has increased to 35%. The primary motives for breaches are financial. It was interesting to note that the percentage of corporate espionage has also increased from 5% to 7% when compared to reports from the previous year. Corporate espionage involves an individual or a group of individuals who are stealing proprietary information, trade secrets, or intellectual property from an organization, or a group of individuals who are stealing this information and selling that to a competitor. In most cases, the individual that is conducting the act are usually paid financially. However, it can also be a disgruntled employee or an ex-employee that are ready to divulge trade secrets to external entity because they feel they've not been properly compensated or wronged by the organization. On the hindsight, it's always a good idea to let a high-profile employee go with a proper exit interview. Of recent, we've noticed that the bad actors have figured out that in most cases, the primary organization of interest has a robust security model in place, and it will be counterproductive for them to attempt to breach these organizations. Instead, they target the weaker link in the data chain, third-party organizations that serve the primary target. In most cases, organizations have a much more relaxed security practices in place as they already have a trusting relationship between them and the third-party provider. As such, using a combination of identity spoofing and man-in-the-middle attack, these bad actors are able to gain access into the organization's environment and start moving laterally across the organization. These breaches occur over time, but can be very damaging since the attacker have worked their way up the food chain within the targeted organization. In some cases, the primary organization would have not had any dealings with a third-party vendor for more than a few years. The bad actors would gain access through backdoor remote access that was created by the vendor for troubleshooting the application through an old admin credential that was used to deliver the project in the past. With the growth of AI, I firmly believe that we should also focus on the threat of generative AI-based attacks. The rise of generative AI sparks the curiosity of what it could be, but also comes with an even bigger unanswered question about what it will be. Although the statistics are still being generated for this, we do see a general rise in the number of generative AI-based threats. A generative AI-based threat could be a combination of any of the threats that we discussed earlier, and it'd be a combination of that. I will walk you through on some of the methods that we can use to mitigate this stress over the next few slides. What are the strategies that we can use to mitigate these threats that we viewed earlier? Proactive defense, encryption, zero trust architecture, compliance and governance, and resilience planning. By no means these strategies that I've listed here are exhaustive. These are merely some of the key strategies that form the foundation of other methods or techniques that you can use to protect the crown jewel of your organization, your data. You'll also be able to understand more about this as we start exploring each of the strategies in depth. Each of these primary strategy involves the implementation of additional subset strategies of defensive techniques to safeguard your environment. In addition to this, the strategies listed here are usually used in combination, and rightly so, as these strategies tend to complement each other. Over the course of this webinar, we'll deep dive into each of these strategies. Feel free to type in your questions in the chat box, and we will review them together in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Let's explore the first strategy, proactive defense. Why it is one of the most important strategies against mitigating cyber attack in your environment. Cyber threat is a booming industry that is worth billions of dollars. Cyber criminals use the advanced techniques that involve artificial intelligence, data dump analysis, machine learning, automation, and many other advanced methodologies to get around an organization's security control to improve the speed that they can harm your environment. As such, gone are the days where the organizations can rely on just the reactive defense methodologies when the attacker is already in the environment. Make no mistake, reactive defense methods are important. However, it needs to be complemented with an equally robust proactive defense. Organizations need to be able to predict and anticipate an attack before the actual attack is carried out against them. Organizations need to be able to predict what and how the attack's going to happen. And that's essentially what proactive defense is. Proactive defense involves you being able to address those gaps before it could be exploited by a bad actor. How would a cybersecurity specialist in your organization predict an attack before it happens? Does he have a cyber threat crystal ball? Not really. Cybersecurity specialists use a combination of techniques to be able to predict an attack before it occurs. Threat hunting, penetration testing, advanced bug and vulnerability notification, and security awareness training are some of the examples of these techniques. Let's go into each of them a bit more deeper. Threat hunting is the process of proactively searching and identifying threats in your organization before your endpoint detection and your response tool or your antivirus tool has an opportunity to catch these threats. It is done by using threat indicators and threat intelligence as a baseline for the hunt. There are tools in the market where it is able to hook in to the vendor's website and analyze for potential loopholes in the environment based on the latest bug and hotfixes updates that are released by the vendor. There are also tools that is able to monitor and alert the security administrators of abnormal changes in the permission, read or write actions across the network, and abnormal behavior in specifics or critical apps in your organization. This process is highly effective against threat actors that like to embed themselves in your organization, quietly moving laterally within your digital network until a vulnerability is identified. A threat hunting tool is a slow burner. Right? It effectively embeds itself deep within your digital network and proactively monitors and alerts you of any abnormality. If threat hunting is a slow burner, then penetration testing is akin to taking a sledgehammer to the walls of your organization. Penetration testing requires the organization to hire a skilled and experienced ethical hacker to intentionally breach the organization's environment via brute force. At the end of the exercise, these hackers will provide a consolidated report on their success or failure in the process. This report will help the organization identify any loopholes or gaps in the environment. The report will also include certain suggestions on how the organizations can close off these gaps on the long run. A recent study that was conducted indicated that 95% of all data compromises occurred due to the lack of security awareness in the employee. The data obtained from the study shows that the employees can be the biggest strength or the biggest liability when it comes to securing an organization. Another study done by Verizon's 2023 data breach report indicates that social engineering incidents have gone up tremendously since last year, and business email-based compromised attacks have nearly doubled when it was compared to the previous year as well. Well, it doesn't help if Darshan in the accounting department just cannot pass up the opportunity to click a link in an email that looks suspicious. It is imperative that you make him understand that it is not a good practice, right? That's the example. Security awareness training really helps. 65% of IT professionals that was polled responded in the same report that phishing-based attacks have dropped once the organization introduced some form of security awareness training for the employees. However, it is important that these trainings are conducted quarterly or on a much shorter gap to improve the knowledge retention, and the training should also include simulations and quizzes to check for the participants' understanding. A common misconception in proactive defense is that it's usually an expensive solution that is time-consuming to implement. While the upfront cost of purchasing the software might be a bit higher, and it will also involve the system administrators to invest some time in configuring it properly, the upfront cost, the benefits of the long-term far outweighs the upfront cost, right? Because ultimately, you're going to lose data and the customer's trust if your organization is breached by a cyber criminal. Another misconception is that the proactive defense technology are for large and highly regulated organizations. This is also far from reality. Reports indicate that there is no disparity between large or small organizations than all environments that is targeted by the cyber criminals. Recent data do indicate that there is a spike in small to medium organizations being targeted by cyber criminals. These organizations are effectively seen as a testbed for target practice before these bad actors launch an actual attack on large enterprise level organizations. I don't believe anyone wants to become a proof of concept environment for cyber criminals. What do you guys think? Encryption. Encryption ensures the confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and the non-repudiation of data. It achieves this by keeping information inaccessible to anyone except the authorized user. It safeguards the data both from accidental and intentional changes. The authentication process in the encryption ensures the identity of the user is legitimate, and the non-repudiation provides evidence that an entity has performed a specific or a malicious task. The importance of encryption as a strategy to mitigate cyber risks is actually undeniable. It is an important tool that the cybersecurity professionals commonly use. In the year 2023 alone, around 353 million individuals fell victim to data breaches that is due to identity theft, with 1.1 of them are directly related to it. And additionally, another 2.3 have fallen victim to fraud-based cyber criminals. And in one of those most effective methods to prevent against these threats is through encryption. There are primarily two types of encryption, symmetric and asymmetric. Symmetric encryption employs the same key for both encrypting and decrypting the data, while asymmetric encryption utilizes different keys for these processes. Each method has its own unique benefits and is applied in various contexts within the field of cybersecurity. An example of asymmetric encryption is RSA, Diffie-Hellman, and the elliptic curve cryptology. An asymmetric encryption is better at handling and transferring small amounts of data. It's commonly referred to as a public key encryption. An example of symmetric encryption as well, on the other hand, is AES, Advanced Encryption Standard, DES, Data Encryption Standard, 3DS, IDEA, and Blowfish. Implementation examples include AES 128, AES 256, and AES 192. It's commonly also in the IT space. It's also commonly referred to as a private key encryption. As an IT professional or a cybersecurity professional, it's important that you question vendors that are providing any SaaS-based service in your organization on what is their policy around encryption in transit and also encryption at rest. Encryption in transit and encryption and rest technologies used by this vendor will give you an idea on how these vendors are transmitting and storing your data, your crown jewel. As a SaaS provider, is effectively managing your organization's data on your behalf in their premises. The data is still yours. So it is ultimately your responsibility to ensure its safety, right? So you should ensure that you need to make it, the vendors are storing it safely, and you need to hold your third-party vendors accountable for it. Encryption in transit is essentially how your data is encrypted while it's being transmitted across digital network from your organization to the vendor's environment. HTTPS, TLS 1.2, or transport layer security are some of the examples of encryption protocol that is designed to provide security over how the data is transmitted in the internet. TLS 1.3 ensures that the data is transmitted over the network in an unreadable state should it be intercepted by a bad actor. As such, the data remains unreadable and thus ineffective. The encryption processes involve utilizing algorithms that transform the data into an unreadable format. This data is referred to as a ciphertext, can only be reverted to its original or plain text format through a decryption key. This key is solely accessible to the authorized individual, which ensures its data integrity. Encryption at rest is encryption that is applied to the data while the data is stored in a storage medium. Some of these examples, as we said earlier, are AES 128, AES 256, and also AES 192. When the encryption is applied to data at rest, it adds an extra layer of protection against unauthorized actors or also bad actors. For optimal security, a full disk encryption is recommended as it offers a higher level of defense compared to a file-based encryption. This is primarily because a file-based encryption only secures individual files, leaving the risk of an encrypted copies being stored in temporary location created by the operating system. How effective is the protection that is provided by the encryption at rest using 256, AES 256, for example? AES 256-bit is virtually uncrackable with any brute force attack method. With the current advancement of the computing capability that is out there, it would probably take a bad actor a few million years for them to break the actual encryption, should they even attempt to try it. The use of encryption in combination with other methodologies in securing a digital network is vital for several reasons, right? It significantly reduces security threats of attacks such as denial of service, malware, database invasion, and unauthorized access to your data, as even if someone's able to get access to the data, they could not weaponize it. It nullifies the threat of data interception. If your organizations use emails where it transmits data across networks and also through internet where they're sending files across from one vendor to another, and if somehow these communications were intercepted, the data is essentially unreadable by the bad actor as the data is encrypted. Should your organization also fall into theft or industrial espionage, either directly or indirectly through an external vendor that is managing your data is encrypted, and thus they will not be able to use it for any criminal intent against you or against somebody else as well. Zero Trust Architecture. Zero Trust Architecture is more commonly referred to as ZTA. It was first proposed in 2011 by John Kinderberg, a former analyst at Forrest researcher. Since then, the Zero Trust infrastructure has become increasingly essential. The rapid pace of digital transformation marks the end of the traditional on-premise system, and it's paving the way for multi-cloud environments, Internet of Things, and also improved mobility. Moreover, users nowadays require immediate access to resources from virtually anywhere to facilitate collaboration and maintain productivity. ZTA, as it's commonly known, is founded on the principle of least privilege. It ensures that users and devices only receive the necessary permission to carry out the task. The approach minimizes the attack surface and also makes it harder for attackers to gain access to sensitive information through lateral movement. The fundamental principles of zero trust architecture are often linked to securing users or specific use cases such as zero trust network access. However, a more holistic approach to zero trust architecture involves a combination of users, application, and infrastructure. Let's look at each of these components individually. For example, let's start off with users. The users are the essential component, as a user includes user identity authentication, the enforcement of least privilege access, and the verification of the device's integrity. Application is also a key tenet of the zero trust architecture, and the notion that the application cannot inherently be trusted, right? Continuous runtime monitoring is crucial to validate its behavior, effectively eliminating implicit trust between different application components that are constantly communicating with each other. From an infrastructure perspective, zero trust architecture mandates that infrastructure comprises of all security aspects related to the infrastructure that the organizations run on, such as routers, switches, cloud services, IoT devices, and also supply chain elements. The zero trust infrastructure also is based on some core principles. In verification, it is verification, least privilege access, and also the notion of always assuming that there is a breach. The zero trust architecture stresses that the resource usage must be continuously monitored to identify unusual activities. Organizations should verify users' authenticity by verifying and authorizing them based on all available data points, such as location, identity, service or workload, and also data classification. It's advisable to implement multi-factor authentication, conduct device health checks, and use application whitelisting to ensure the integrity of the user's identity, device's posture, and applications. Second, the principle of least privilege limits the user's access rights only to the data, application, and services necessary to perform their authorized tasks. This principle within zero trust architecture is implemented through detailed access control, just-in-time access, or just enough access. Risk-based adaptive access policies also play a key role in balancing security with productivity. Adhering to the principle of least privileges reduces the potential for exposure or damage resulting from insider trust or compromised user accounts. Finally, the zero trust architecture operates under the belief that the security breaches will occur and that threats can originate both from inside and also outside the organization's network perimeter. The primary goal of zero trust architecture is to reduce the impact of breach when it happens. This involves microsegmentation of sensitive resources, applying end-to-end encryption, continuously monitoring the user and device's behavior for any anomalies, and establishing a strong incident and recovery strategies. What are some of the stages, right, that we can use to implement a zero trust architecture? These stages differ from organization to organization, but these are some of the general steps. The stage one is you to identify where the organization looks at all its assets. It includes evaluating the existing security measure and also assessing the risks of cyber attacks. The evaluation should also identify what is the organization's objective to adopt zero trust architecture. Stage two involves the organization establishing the security objective that it determined earlier, determining the necessary security controls that they need to put in place to meet those objectives and creating a plan to implement these controls. Stage 3 requires the organization to deploy the required technology, configuring the required security controls, and training the users with the updated security policies. The advice here is that the implementation should be done in a staged manner so that each and every step of the security measures that is employed is continuously tested before it's rolled out to all the users. The fourth stage, the organization focuses on continuous monitoring of the security environments for potential threats, responding to those incidents, and also adjusting the security controls as necessary. Last but not least, the stage 5 looks at continuous improvement, right? It involves the organization to regularly assess the security posture, identify any of the emerging threats, and adjust the security controls as necessary. Let's move on. Compliance and governance. Depending on who you talk to, compliance and governance will, the narrative on that will differ based on the region and based on who do you talk to, right? Fundamentally, compliance and governance is crucial because it builds a solid security foundation, promotes best practices, and guides the organization in developing a thorough security program. It requires a security team to take a risk-based approach and implement measures that protect the 3 fundamental aspects of information: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Some of the other common compliance and government standards are ISO 27001, NIST, and SOC 2. These standards provide controls to safeguard your environment and also your crown jewels from potential breaches and also vulnerabilities. Let's look at it from a perspective of NIST, right? The National Institute of Standards and Technology. It uses what it calls the term GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. Let's look at them individually. Governance refers to the organizational strategy for cybersecurity and information security. Effective governance is treated as the organization-wide priority, right? Looking at planned, managed, and evaluated across all the areas. In IT governance, leaders are responsible for and committed to allocating the required resources to the information security department. It also includes them outlining several principles to guide the thought process around cybersecurity governance, which includes conducting an annual cybersecurity evaluation, performing periodic risk assessment of all the information assets in the organization, implementing policies and procedures, and also establishing a security management framework that clearly defines individual roles, responsibilities, authority, and accountability. Now, once a system of governance is established and well-defined, the organization can start the next step, the assessment of the risk, right? It's imperative that you value your current organization's cybersecurity setup and identify any potential gaps. The thorough analysis should aim to understand your specific requirements, identify current vulnerability, and also provide a detailed list of recommendations to address these vulnerabilities. Compliance, look at how certain industries require the business that they deal, or the third party or the vendors that they deal with, to be compliant with the governmental or industry relevant protocol. The compliance aspect requires the organization to develop a thorough understanding of those frameworks to ensure that they remain in compliance. Some of this includes such as HIPAA, PCI, DSS, GDPR, CCPA, and etc. How does this help? Because compliance and governance offer a systematic way to safeguard sensitive customer information, which in turn enhances the organization's market reputation and forces the customer to trust the vendor as well. So this approach determines the organization's dedication to maintaining a secure business practices while reducing the risk of data breaches. Last but not least, resilience planning, right? The objective of resilience planning is to prepare, respond, and quickly recover from a cyber incident event. It makes it possible for the business to continue the operation with minimal disruption to their internal workflow and also processes. A holistic resilience plan is built on solid assessment of the cyber risk that the business is most likely to experience, plus also evaluating it from the internal and external threat as well. Ever heard of this? If you plan to fail, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. It's a famous quote by Benjamin Franklin. Right. So the widespread disruptions to business and the shift from remote work caused by the global health and the political crisis have increased the security challenges in numerous organizations. And resilience planning is one of the key aspects that they look into, right? And some of the components of resilience planning is risk management, focuses on identifying any potential threat. Disaster recovery strategy, a comprehensive disaster recovery strategy is essential for cyber resiliences. It allows the organization to restore the system's infrastructure following an attack. It's vital to consistently test these recovery strategies, because I've seen a lot of customers have it in place, but they rarely test it. So when it happens, when they try to run the plan, it fails to work. Business continuity, it refers to the organization's ability to sustain an attack and continue operation to provide in somewhere. It plays a crucial role in continuously supporting the organization's primary and key functions. Cybersecurity as well plays a vital role in resilience planning. The support of strong tools and policies cybersecurity teams employ works to ensure that the resilience plan is in a good state, right? The chain of cyber resilience also encompasses not just the organization as well, but you also need to look into the third-party vendors that you deal with. So essentially, because you're sharing information, you also need to ensure that the external party that you deal with have a robust resilience plan in place and also cybersecurity controls in place. Finally, how do we measure a resilience plan? There's two aspects to it, right? Incident response time and mean time to recover. Incident response time looks at how quickly can you recover or address an incident once it occurs, plus the mean time to recovery evaluates the average time to return to normal business operation following incident. With that, we've come to a conclusion. I hope the session was informative and useful. Obviously, there's a lot more to cover, but I hope the session provides a basic overview of some of the strategies that you can use to mitigate cyber incident in your environment. Shipa, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sentil, for delivering such an informative session, and our attendees share the same sentiments. If you're interested to learn more about our program, do let us know in the poll that's going to be conducted now. If you would like to learn more, please select yes, and we will schedule a call to provide you with more information.
I'm happy to answer any Q&As that you have, Shilpa.
Yes, sure, Sentil. We have got a lot of questions. Before that, I just have an important note to announce. So,
Sure.
admissions are presently open. For comprehensive details regarding our courses, kindly visit our official website www.eccu.edu. The link is given in the chat section. So, shall we start with the Q&A, Sentil?
Sure.
Okay. So, our first question to you is, what is the role of machine learning in mitigating cyber threats, and how can it be efficiently applied to do so?
That's a good question, right? And a lot of new tools in the market and the customers that I've worked with, use that in some way, because the advance and the speed of how an attack is made, how a threat is made by an organization requires a much in-depth analysis. So machine learning and artificial intelligence play a key role. There are already tools out there in the market that do this. They analyze the environment and they embed themselves within the application. They also embed themselves at the gateway where the customer communicates to an external party. It hooks into the vendor's vulnerability tool, so security notification. You also should also talk to your vendors about early notification if you have not. And that's how they use those machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict a threat or a potential vulnerability before it happens. Now, once that's done, so it requires you to work with your operation team to assess those alerts that's been picked up by these tools and validate the bug, the vulnerability. And machine learning, how it comes into play is that it helps to look at trends. So it sets a baseline in your environment, and that's why it sits in the organization. It looks at the baseline, right? So what are the normal behavior of a user, of an application, in terms of read-write processes, in terms of permission modification. So it sets the baseline. Once it goes beyond that, once the threshold is breached, it sends those alerts, and those alerts then get pushed into an alerting system that then translates to your SecOps. So that's how machine learning and artificial intelligence work, and that's actually the growing trend in security tools right now. One of the days where you react reactively, right? Now it's more about proactive reaction, and that's the functionality of machine learning. Be able to do big data analysis and also heuristically provide a view to your SecOps team on where a potential threat could occur and where it could occur.
Thank you, Sentil, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, wow, I appreciated the training very much. Someone has written for you. And my question is, what are some of the effective methods to detect and prevent phishing attacks?
Right. See, if you ask me, I'd say the main one, and this is my view, and I think I share this view with a lot of other people as well, is security awareness training. Because fundamentally, the idea of a phishing attack is to take advantage of the weakest link in security. And everybody that we talk to knows that the weakest link in the security or the entire data chain is the human being. So to prevent phishing and identity theft attack, I can't stress enough the importance of a security awareness training. I myself go through that process in my organization that I work with, and where we work with, it's a good example that we do that in a quarterly basis. And the test or the awareness training itself is short and sweet, about 15 to 20 minutes. At the end of that session, there's a couple of quizzes, and there's a minimum passing score, right? I have known organizations that require mandate you to pass all the quizzes, but in most cases, there's a minimum score that you need to pass. This involves some simulations on some of the phishing attacks that has happened, and you need to pick up and identify what could potentially be a trigger, right? And then that training is repeated constantly on a quarterly basis to ensure that the employees are aware of the changes in the market, because that training is updated based on the external trends in the market. And a non-compliance to an employee that doesn't want to do the training is that the organization start blocking access to those applications that they use, right? So it gives you the importance and stresses the importance of how important those awareness training are. And in my opinion, and I think I've shared this with a lot of other people as well, that the main or the primary tool that you can use to prevent a phishing attack is a security awareness training.
Thank you so much, Sentil, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, I would like to understand the concept of database monitoring using DAM. What are the risks or KRI to monitor, and what is the best practices or approach for effective risk management?
Can you repeat that? Because there's a lot of abbreviation in there, right? I didn't understand. Can you repeat that question again, Shilpa? Or
Yes,
maybe we can
sure.
take it. Yeah.
I'll repeat. I would like to understand the concept of database monitoring using DAM. So it's DAM. What the risk or KRI to monitor, and what is the best practices or approach for effective risk management?
Effective disk management, is it?
Risk, yeah, RISK, risk management.
Right. So you can look at key risk indicators, right? So for example, uh, what we do, and some of the ones I've seen where they look at changes in the database, they look at abnormal updates in the database. So there are actually tools that actually looked at. It comes back to the baseline and the trending as well. So if there's a huge dump, or there's a huge entropy change, or entropy is combination of the change rate and the entropy rate, right? High amount of abnormality in terms of the database tables are updated. So those are some of the tools that you can use to check that.
Thank you, Sentil, for answering that question. Next question to you is, what are the methods to prevent spam calls and to minimize fake SMS and email?
Prevent spam and fake emails, is it?
Yeah, spam
Yeah.
calls and fake SMS and email.
Right. So you'd probably seen this, right? Some of the best practices that nowadays, for example, if you want to download certain information online, if you want to download certain reports online, it asks you to provide your personal email address or your corporate email address. Now, it's important that you use and provide those information on legitimate sites and not just any sites that you find online. Because in every time these information is there, these are shared. They also have a tick box down there. If you look in a lot of these third-party entities where it asks you for you to provide consent that they can use those information that you're sharing with them for marketing purposes. Now, if you're just downloading those information for research, there's no need for you to actually select that option. So personally, that's what I do to prevent myself from getting any spam emails, and consistently work and flag those spams that you get. Maybe sometimes your information is sold through a third party to a dark web. And if you get that, send it across to your security team, let them assess it. But internally, I think your best practice as well, always make sure what are you taking and what options are you selecting when you're downloading information, when you're looking for information on the internet. And if you don't need to provide consent, do not provide consent. That's what I do. That's some of the practices that I use.
Thank you so much, Sentil, for answering that question. Our next question to you is, how can we identify fake email and genuine emails?
Right. It comes back down to training, right? So, and I'll pick an example. A lot of times, the security awareness training involves you getting familiar with those real and fake emails. And this comes back to the awareness training. Some cases, some bad actors tend to modify some characters within the email. There's an additional full stop, there's an additional A, or there's a character less. These all comes through training. There's no one prescriptive method saying that this is how it will come, and this is how the threat would look like. Because a lot of these bad actors use AI and use machine learning as well. They have adaptive threat intelligence, right? So they also have tools that constantly adapt looking at users' behavior. So it comes back down to training. It comes back down to how familiar you are with the concept of those phishing, of identity theft, and how you use and secure your data. And when you're sharing the data externally, what are the techniques and what are the best practices that you use when you share your data externally?
Thank you, Sentil, for answering that question. We'll take last two questions for the day. So our next question to you is how to prevent snooping.
Snooping. So usually snooping, what you do is you have tools to prevent that, but a very clear methodology to nullify the impact of snooping is through data encryption, right? Essentially, snooping involves a user peeking at your information without doing anything. They don't modify the data, they just snoop around. So if they want to snoop around, the data has to be transmitted in plain text format, right? In the past, I've seen organizations use some sort of security encryption while the data is in transit and the data is at rest. Mostly data in transit, they use TLS 1.1 or TLS 1.0. So those versions of all have long outdated. Organizations are required to move to TLS 1.3. Some of them still use 1.2. TLS 1.3 provides a much better encryption in terms of while the data is in transit. So when you deal, that is some of the methods that you can use yourself, and also force your vendors that you work with to use those technologies, right? Find out what are the encryption methods they use. Find out how are they securing the data that's transmitted from your organization to them. So if you're sending an email with an attachment, encrypt that. Encrypt that so that when you send that stuff, when you're sending passwords, also do not distribute it to external people. So if you're sharing the key to unlock the data, make sure you don't send it to a distributed list. You send it to an individual person, or you use an alternative method to provide that key so that it's not sent through an email. It's sent to another system, maybe an SMS, etc. So you break that chain so that there's multiple points that the snooper has to compromise to be able to read your data.
Thank you, Sentil, for answering that question. Our last question to you is, thank you for the insightful webinar. I would like to ask, how can organizations effectively select appropriate cryptographic algorithms to safeguard sensitive data? This selection should be ideally balanced factors such as security strength, performance efficiency, and future-proofing against potential quantum computing threats.
Right. Okay. That's a very good question. And I'd say in most cases, it would depend on the type of data that you manage. And in most cases, it will also depend the vendors that you deal with. So fundamentally, you're going to be using a couple of tools from external vendors, and also depend on the computing capability that the organizations have. Using a large factor encryption, right? So for example, AES 256 bit-based encryption, the data is at rest, is one of the best out there in the market, right? So it's very simple to implement. It doesn't take a lot of computing power, but it's very hard to break. Literally millions of years based on the current encryption technology that's available. And you also need to ensure that your vendor does the same as well, right? So ultimately, if you're going to use one encryption method and your vendor's using another encryption method, it's just not going to work because you got to share some keys. So it depends on the vendor that you deal with, the tools that you use. Where I see this is very important is nowadays when we are doing a lot of SaaS-based application, right? So Microsoft 365, backup and data management tool, Salesforce, SRM tools, right? You need to enforce, or first of all, ask your vendor whether they're using that, whether they have that option. Some vendors have that option, but it's an opt-in option. You got to either pay extra or have an additional license, or request them to turn on encryption at rest, right? because you have to understand, if they turn that on, it's also an additional cost on their end because they're providing you a service. So those checks and balances come into play when you want to look at what type of encryption methodologies you want to use in your environment.
Thank you, Sentil. And again, thank you again to a wonderful speaker for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was a pleasure to have you with us, Mia, and looking for more and more sessions with you. Now, before we conclude the webinar, Sentil, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
Thank you guys for joining the webinar, and really appreciate the questions. And thank you also EC Council for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to be talking to everybody else and any future sessions. And if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me through EC Council. I'm sure they'll be able to pass me those questions that you have, and I'm happy to answer those questions as well.
Thank you so much, Sentil, for your message to our audience.